Not sure if I recognize any faces.
Good afternoon, everybody. Bear with us just a moment because we want to make sure that we can access everybody. With the new Zoom, it's actually meaning that we have to admit everybody one at a time. So just bear with us as we just let as many people in as possible. Thank you. Okay. Welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the Educational Collaborative of International Schools, established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in our 78 countries. My name is Georgie McIntyre and I'm the Chief Learning Officer of ECIS. I lead on professional development support for the international schools community, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. This is an unprecedented time for schools around the world. The international schools market has seen an enormous wave of impact since January, when the first schools in China were closed. Since then, international school heads of business and finance have had to address huge unpredictability whilst managing significant financial challenges from all directions of their schools community. Today, please join me in welcoming and thanking the SIG Business and Finance Committee, who are our panel today. They are made up of Ruth Smiley, Head of Business and Finance at the International School of Luxembourg since 2000, Piotr Butchevich, who is currently working as the Business and Facility Manager at the International School of Krakow. Tatiana Terza is working as the Business and Operations Manager at the American International School of Zagreb, Croatia. And Zigeta Pornieta is working as the Business Manager at the International School of Latvia. Special interest groups are an active body of volunteer practitioners contributing both to the professional development of other practitioners and to the international school sector as a whole. Much of the wonderful content you will experience now, they've worked on. This is their vision. We have a large virtual audience today, so if you can type your questions in the discussion box, and we also will be issuing a link that we would invite you to contribute to, which is an optional survey. We are actually recording this webinar, so we will be circulating our discussions today. Thank you for your contributions, and I will now hand you over to Ruth Smiley, who will be chairing our session today. Thank you, Ruth.
Hello. So yes, as Georgie mentioned, as SIG, Special Interest Groups business, try to be a sounding board, or at least a basis to prepare the conferences or to prepare material, and of course to especially mention that you know, that as business managers we're often isolated, and find it extremely useful to be able to share information and find either like schools or just like positions or like questions. And yeah, and so one of the first points is to say that you know, we're open to receive questions and queries and such. Tatiana has prepared a Google doc, as we all, you know, live and live by, and she will share it, or has shared it in the chat. And this was sort of, it is a number of questions that we've had in our individual schools as SIG members, and we will, you know, please feel free to complete or to visualize the information, because there was a number of questions. I'm just going to probably just briefly present what's happening in Luxembourg. I mean, Piotr and Tatiana and Zigisa will probably just briefly do the same to go through the questions that this webinar was planned for. Mainly a Q&A. Of course, it's much harder to do that at 58 participants. But the chat and the Google Doc hopefully will allow for that. So in Luxembourg, the International School of Luxembourg, we're 1,400 students, K through 12, and we are going through the interesting process of re-entering next week. My boss Joachim is also here, but yes, very interesting. We've been in lockdown for the last 8 weeks, and the Ministry of Education, to which we attached, is asking to open in alternate ways. So half of the classes for secondary start next week, the week after another half, and the primary would be starting end of May, again in alternate, so that half the students are in a class and the other half come the next week, and so on. Again, every country is doing it in different ways, even just with our neighboring countries, Belgium, France, Germany. As you can imagine, Luxembourg's quite small with a 400,000 resident population. It's extremely intriguing how everybody's doing it differently. So we have done virtual learning, and we're reopening next week. To go down to the next question, are we reimbursing fees? Well, that's a question that all the schools have been tackling, and so far we're holding to no, based on our circumstance, sort of our conditions, stating that we do not reimburse if things are outside of our control. Again, you would have probably gone through a number of wordings in your contracts to check that with your suppliers, the same way as we're doing it with our clients. Again, those are things that have to be revisited nearly day by day based on how we enter or not. We have recently taken the decision grade 12 is not going, 12 is finished because they've no IB. Grade 12, grade 11 will not be coming back due to the scheduling nightmare in an alternative week situation. We so far are not planning on enrollment being that much different next year. However, we know that those will be challenges in terms of our expat families being able to come in, or being able to wanting to come in or back. We are monitoring that, and basically exceptions are being asked for, of course, because of the uncertainty, and those we will be looking at case by case. And we have so far worded it that they have to provide us documented COVID-related reasons to potentially get exceptions. So we know, for example, that immigration office is closed, therefore, well, that will certainly go and impact visas. And again, day by day. The question of savings or extra costs, well, that's a daily plus minus situation. What we've saved during lockdown is probably going to get spent in re-entry. We are sort of investing in thermal cameras, extra masks, disinfectant, extra cleaning, extra security to monitor that. We're having to pay more for lunches because the volume is of course half of what normal, or we're managing those costs and of course negotiating and getting those. But yeah, at the moment, the plus minus is luckily for us, because is netting out. But again, buying X number of masks and such. Again, in Luxembourg, we're quite comfortable in the sense that the ministry is very clear on a certain number of steps. They're proactive in discussing Q&A questions. You know, can we do this? Can we do that? They have provided every resident with 5 masks. They're talking about providing every resident with 50 masks coming weeks. They are providing support in the legal aspects of unemployment or temporary unemployment or child leave because or leaves for vulnerable people. So a number of those things are structured, but it's true that I can imagine that, and in some of my counterparties elsewhere, when there is none of that framework, then the question lies with the school as to taking those decisions or having that burden financially. And clearly that unfortunately is linked to each country. So I think, and then the last question was about staff. Yes, we have seen impacts on recruitment applications. We've had to survey staff members, you know, as to their anxiety level or what would help to allow them to come in. What would make them less anxious? Well, just talking about it sometimes helps, and walking through it. The other things is, you know, where are you? I think some lockdown happened here quite quickly, and move overs to other borders. You know, it happened before the holidays, so people weren't all over the world before they had to decide whether they were going to come back or not. But it's true that as a SIG group, we've also discussed what next, and some schools most likely will have the question of, if they leave this summer, will they ever come back? And of course that is a question. Some schools have decided as well to sort of postpone or be flexible on home leaves to alleviate that. You know, you will probably not be able to leave this summer. You know, can we postpone? That reduces the risk. But otherwise it's, again, surveys and asking staff members what that is. So I think I've tried to go around the questions that we proposed. I see there's a few chat questions.
Yeah, Ruth, Georgie here. With one question that we've had is, are there any plans on new hires for 2021? As consulates are usually closed on the administration side.
On our side, as I said, we've seen a sort of slowing down of applications, so because of the uncertainty, but we're still hopeful that we will get the work permits needed for the staff members that are planned to come this coming year. Yeah, but it's true that that is a concern as well for new families as well as staff.
Excellent, thank you, Ruth.
Yeah. So I don't know if my counterpart SIG members might want to just give a brief overview as well, or I'm just going to see back in the chat. But yeah, with the number we are, please don't hesitate to use the chat. We'll open up the.
And in the meantime, maybe I can share our thoughts from Krakow, from Poland. International School of Krakow, we have approximately 300 students, and we are in lockdown since beginning of March, and recently the government actually last week was loosening the restriction on schooling. They said the nurseries and preschools may come back, maybe reopen this week, but the decisions are moved to the local authorities. And we are, as a non-profit school, we are not under the Ministry of Education supervision. So we had a long discussion if we should reopen the school for our early years and kindergarten. And it seems we decided, at least for this week, we are going to stay closed, and possibly more likely we are going to continue virtual learning till end of the year. It seems like we are not going to meet the restriction which allow us to meet our educational values and vision, and also mission. It looks the education will go rather to babysitting. I mean, in early years and in kindergarten, with the restriction that the government are imposing on us. So that's quite challenging. And that's for this year. And enrollment, we are expecting enrollment in the next year. We are building this scenario from a flat scenario, even going to 50% reduction in enrollment. It's right now it's a very speculative environment. So we take a very extreme reduction in enrollment. We have no idea what is going to happen. So that's why it's quite wide range between flat to minus 50%. And a lot of questions came from parents, especially about the discounts, rebates, and refunds on tuition fees. And the school decision, and for now, is we don't go with any refunds or rebates or discounts for this year. Even for students in kindergarten or early years, where it's so difficult to provide virtual learning. And the reason is because we still maintain the amount of teachers and assistant teachers, and the maximum effort that the school is doing right now is fabulous. The amount of the working hours that teachers and assistants are putting because of the virtual learning are almost doubled. So we maintain also the highest cost in the budget, which is staffing. And so there is no decision for now to go with any discounts. There is some savings on the energy cost, but at the same point, we are looking at the high cost of the COVID implementation of CCTV cameras, of gates, thermal gates, and all of these innovative solutions that we need to have in place because of the sanitary regime. In the next year, we announced 3.5 tuition increase, and that was in January. We are not going to change our decision, so we are going with the tuition that we announced. Our maintenance and cleaning staff, they do the deep cleaning, so we are doing the repairs, maintenance. Some of them, they are using the vacation time. So we are not laying off, and also support staff and admin staff. And the biggest also issue is with staff and overseas staff because of the visa process. That's very risky. We expect some changes in the process of visas. And also, I think we experience the same issue is the travel. And also self-quarantine time, and also the risk if there is a second wave and the overseas staff go to the countries, there is a risk if the borders are closed again. How are we going to continue? I mean, the education on campus. If we reopen and if the education is on campus, then there is an issue. If we continue virtual learning, there is no issue because staff can basically teach from anywhere. Basically, that's the short overview of what is happening in Poland, and it's quite intense, especially of the government restrictions and announcements sometimes overnight. So we have to adjust to the government announcements, which is not nice because, as I said last week, they said that in a few days they are going to reopen the nurseries and preschools, and it's challenging to adjust the entire operational just within 48 or 72 hours. Back to you, Ruth, or someone else.
Hi Ruth, you're on mute at the moment. I perhaps while you're undoing that, I would just share a question we had from El Ricci. Does any one of you apply special conditions, or you're planning to apply special conditions for next year's tuition fees, like payment holidays or tuition reduction, etc.? I know you referred to that, Piotr. Would you have any other sort of suggestions or things that you're thinking of considering? Still muted, Piotr. Hang on, I'll unmute you.
We are expecting more families to apply for financial aid. So we are preparing us. Actually, we are adjusting or changing the existing financial aid policy to respond to these requests, because the existing financial aid policy we have in place is not going to work. We need to either change the percentage of the reduction in fees for financial aid families, or also change the percentage that in the budgets overall. So that's absolutely, I think, a must to help these families in short term, or in the next year, or in the next 2 years. So we are looking at this, and of course, the other issue is which is related to the financial aid, is the payment plans. So as we are adjusting the policy of our payment plans, because simply of the cash flow, all of these families that will need financial support, but we have not changed our position in terms of the discounts. We are going to help the families in short term, but we are not going to, at least for now, change the position in terms of the discounts, and also increase in fees that we announced in January.
Thank you, Piotr. It's great because we're actually getting a lot of people sharing sort of what they're doing in their situation. From IS Rheintal, they're saying they're in a similar situation. ISR are saying that Rheintal say they're not refunding and not having any different conditions for next year. American School of BCN haven't discounted anything this year, but they have frozen the fees for next year. We've got a question here from KAS Finance Director. Is anyone facing government restrictions regarding collection of fees? Because in India, schools have been asked not to force the payment of fees. So that's a really interesting question.
No, not in Latvia.
No, so far not. Again, yeah, that is certainly an extra challenge. To go back to the sort of assistance, it's true that as for Piotr, we, I think, Zigita, your keyboard's too close to your phone.
Sorry, I will gonna mute myself, sorry.
No worries. Good rhythm to my speech. No, we created, we had to also, we're expecting to have more requests, and we made a special COVID specific next year application, because it's true, our current one wouldn't apply.
Yeah, I think also there's a similar situation we've got here, that certainly not in Chile for school fees. They've frozen the fees for 2021 though. There's no reductions in Spain for school fees, but they've had reductions for bus, cafeteria and after school. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, Cam, you were sharing about several European countries that are not actually allowed to assist on payment of fees. So I think if you're in that situation as well, that's quite challenging. There doesn't appear to be any restrictions in Uzbekistan or Budapest. Carmel Norton, thank you for sharing. You've frozen fees for next year and plans to refund bus catering, ECAs and instrumental music lessons for period of closure. She's in Thailand, so thank you for being with us today, Carmel. There's no restrictions in Morocco, and there's a suggestion here that the tuition fees are actually being frozen for the next 2 years. Here's a question here from AIS Bamako. How about countries that have created labour regulation disallowing COVID layoffs? This has happened in Mauritania. I think that's quite an unusual situation. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, I mean, it's true that we're all in different situations in regards to that. Yeah, I mean, Luxembourg's clearly lucky in the sense that there's funding involved to avoid the layoffs. But no, we've not had that, which is disallowing COVID related.
We in Croatia also doesn't have any disallowing layoffs, but if people didn't lay off employees in March and April and May, they will get some government help, and they already did receive some government help for salaries, and they don't have to pay taxes. So that's good. Regarding tuitions, we decided, although first decision was to increase tuition fee for 1.5% next school year, we decided not to return any fees because of virtual learning this year, but to freeze tuition fees for next year.
Yep.
And we also Croatian schools are starting, but the rules and guidelines are written in a such way that actually discourage schools to have students in the class. I mean, and they will continue online. However, who really can prove that both parents are working and they have no place to put the children, then they are able to bring them to school. So American International School of Zagreb decided to continue with virtual learning for this academic year.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's really good to hear. So you're based in Zagreb, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. We've also had some comments here from Italy. So Elrish is saying that they've forbidden collective layoffs for 60 days, starting of March the 5th. AIS Johannesburg, thank you for joining us. They've frozen the fees and they're considering refunds for buses next year. So this is all really helpful to sort of apply consistency across the schools. I think it's great to hear what other countries and experiences are having.
I mean, yeah, sorry. I mean, when we've talked between business managers of benchmarking and sort of sharing numbers and such, we always know that there's challenges in what our numbers hide or contain or don't contain. And so when, you know, queries of refunds and come up, what I've found useful is to ask, you know, is it a boarding school or not? You know, is it a for-profit school or not? You know, you know, and those aspects or what do the fees include? You know, all of us have different patchworks of this is included, this is not included, this is partly subsidized, this is not subsidized. I don't think any school is doing it in the same way. And of course that makes the refund questions challenging or more clear. But yeah, we've had parents go, oh, but in Spain, you know, they refund, and we try to be very we ask them, so which school are you talking about? And most often, or so far, the 2-3 names I've been given were boarding schools, you know, where the students were sent home. So that kind of helps as well sometimes to not feel overburdened by what the others are doing, because they're not the same.
Yeah, that you can't compare. It's apples and pears, isn't it? We have a phrase here in England, apples and pears, and comparing the difference. Yeah, just sharing some other people's comments here. The Indian government has asked to pay wages in full. That's now in court, but there's no stay order and the payment has to be done. As a school, they've decided not to lay off, but they're looking at fresh recruitment very carefully. Again, Idris, private schools are out of scope for government COVID financial support as businesses were not interrupted, business was not interrupted. Spain's considering virtual school for the rest of the year, and I think that's a conversation perhaps that, you know, is going to continue. Certainly from ECIS's perspective, we're actually reviewing all of our face-to-face conference schedule that we'd actually put in place already and looking at what alternatives we can do. That's revolved around sort of developing virtual conferences. We actually had a virtual leadership conference about 2 weeks ago where we had over 900 delegates accessing that. And we have our virtual early childhood conference this weekend. So come look at our website and see what else we have available that's coming up. We've got a question here from Karen. To what extent have current uncertainties impacted on budget setting process for the next academic year? Thank you, Karen.
I think one of the things is that it certainly provides, any uncertainty provides clarity on what are the real variables that you can have either control or action on. And you know, whenever we set the budgets as business managers, we know that it's going to be tuition, there's going to be enrollment, there's going to be staffing, and then there's a lot of other things. But those are most often the major variables. So yeah, as Piotr said, you know, he's going scenarios of 0 to 50% difference. That certainly changes your perspective of the budget. So yeah, is getting to know what's in your numbers to know what is controllable or not.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
one interesting question. Are you working on scenarios that might force us to reduce the number of students in each classroom? That's something that actually was a requirement from Croatian government, that in the classroom we can have only 9 students plus teacher, and teacher needs to be the same, no changes, and they need to be together at least for 2 weeks, so no new students is allowed to join. We are thinking that this rule will not be the same in August, at least we are hoping. And if that will be the case, then we will need to think about we will need to take this scenario into account, that only 10 people can be in the room, which means that we will have to have 2 shifts. So now we have school from 8 to 3, probably then we will need to have 2 shifts and decrease schedule and shorten the schedule, the hours duration, and I think that this will limit number of students in each school, which is quite difficult because you need to pay fixed costs, you need to pay salaries, you need to pay foreign hired teachers, and at the same time you are not able to enroll more students that will cover those costs. So I think definitely it will be very challenging next year, but at the moment we didn't budget all those scenarios.
Yeah, I've got here some other people, thank you, Tatiana. Other people are saying they're working on contingency plans and postponing some of the capital expenditure developments they intended this year. So I think there's going to be a lot of things that are put on hold. I'm sure, you know, the SIG are also experiencing similar situations.
I think, you know, any capital plan should be revised smartly, because at the end of the day, we need a cash cushion. So, I mean, each school will need to look into the cash reserves, and they ask the question, how much can we subsidize the deficit, if there is a deficit? But it may be a deficit, because what we are looking and what we are facing is the drop in the enrollment. We don't know by what percent, and we are going to retain the same number of staff. So I would expect the deficit anyway. And then the question is, for how long can we subsidize the deficit from the cash reserves? And then we may ask the question, okay, if the cash reserves is XYZ, then should we revise the capital budget? Because we may need also some extra funding from the capital budget if your policy allows to do it, because maybe your policy doesn't allow you to do it, to subsidize your cash reserves from your capital reserves. I don't know, but I think I would think twice or even three times on any maintenance or capital investments in the next year or two, because the schools will need more conservative cash reserves management policy than ever, because we don't know what we are facing at the end of the day. And the schools are not operating in isolation. As a business, we are connected. So if we are looking at the business of airline business, where there is a 90% of layoffs, and et cetera, is a domino, business domino. So I would expect, you know, some hit financial. So I think I would be very careful with capital spending for the next year or two.
Yeah, I think everyone's feeling that. Actually, Maria from American School of BCN, she's just shared that they're doing a lot of scenarios, looking even from 50 to 100 less students, and looking at cutting cost centre budgets by 50%. Thank you for sharing that, Maria. I also think we've got here, interestingly, TIS continuing virtual learning to the end of the school year. They were looking at fees for next year increased by 1.7, but they're thinking of offering financial aid to families who have difficulty paying. So I think that may be a case-by-case scenario. So that's probably something that other people are considering. There's a good question here from Icton. As we are still collecting capital levy, it is not justifiable to cancel capital investments. Apologies, that wasn't a question.
Well, I mean, that's basically depending on the wording as to how you can, as Piotr say, potentially delay. It might not be cancelling.
Yeah, very clever. Brad.
There's always delay in capital, you know, building and.
Exactly.
I mean, our work sites were closed during lockdown as well, so
yeah, we had some scenarios here in the UK where it wasn't for a while, and then deemed when you couldn't work from home, but yeah, that's been applied a lot more heavily now. Brad from AIS Bamako, we've postponed building projects proposed to be paid from capital reserves from now and into the coming year. They've got obligation payments that have come from the capital budget and may find ourselves in need of those capital reserves. So again, I think that backs up your point. Somebody else, KIS Finance Director, we are looking at postponing some of our capital X more from the point of executability. India is still being in lockdown, so movement of material and labour is very limited. There's a question here from Carmel Norton. What are the major cost levers people are looking to use to manage next year's budgets? Great question, Carmel.
Yeah.
What's the secret?
What's the secret? Well, I guess most of your schools have a certain percentage with his staff. So, and we're all usually sensitive to not touch that. But the same way as schools have talked about freezing, I mean, we're not the case, but I know around certain schools that if they've frozen the fees, they may have frozen any salary increases. They may have, you know, frozen steps. They, you know, cost of living, if there's one due to inflation, is probably going to be frozen anyway. There's certainly freezing recruitment. You know, discussing, you know, I don't know, substituting, you know, is done in-house, you know, if that's not already the case. Everything, basically, you've really got to go through every line item and go with the 2-year-old question, which is why, you know, why this, why that, unfortunately, and it really, I guess it really depends on each school as to, I mean, you know, do you need new pencils? No, probably not. You know, you've probably got enough to last. You know, everything can be postponed to a certain extent because we know that the value is the teacher in front of the students. So yeah, it's there's no major cost levers.
Good, but maybe if I may just to step in, for example, from this year we have some savings, and I think that that's something we can look at also in the next year. It's student travel, maybe hosting some events, whether we will host or not. PD development is for teachers, and staff is also rely on extensive travel. So all those are topics where, I mean, places where you can make cuts.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing there, Maria. Does anyone have any more questions or want to share with us any sort of comments at all? Sagita, would you like to give us some feedback, comments, and your experience?
Okay, I was able to unmute myself. No, I just wanted to ask everyone to fill in the survey, because that will, because, you know, as we are finishing quite soon, that would give us more insight of what the other schools are doing. For us, we are refunding, and we have frozen the tuition increase and as well the salary increases, obviously, for the next school year. So that's what we are doing in this regard. And as well, we are almost, I think, the only ones which are refunding the money for the pre-3 and pre-4 groups. Because we finished early, our pre-3, pre-4 finished on 30 of April. And because, you know, it's a child, the pre-3 and pre-4 as well is not only about education, but as well about a child minding. And this is the function not provided by the school through this period. So that was the decision for our school.
Thank you for sharing, Sagita. That's great to hear. We've actually got another question here. So from American School, Monterrey, Mexico. Hi. Has anyone made 2 or 3 year scenario projections? If so, what basic assumptions did you make?
That's a good question. And I don't know if there is anyone who can answer this question, because I mean, 5 years, I mean, it's too long from now. I mean, we have 5 years financial plan anyway, but I think in current circumstances it's just too long. I mean the next week the situation may change. I mean, in the next month but we are looking in the next 24 months max for now. 5 years plan is just, I think whatever we are going to draft will not be reliable. I mean, not enough data right now. And this is what I said at the beginning. The scenarios goes from flat scenario to minus 50% reduction, which tells me it's quite speculative. So looking forward 5 years, it would be even more speculative scenarios. So, but maybe someone else have some magic wands.
You can all raise hand and share your practice and your experience in this.
There's waving of hands. I don't know if Clara, Georgie, if
yeah,
we've got a few minutes where someone.
yeah. If I unmute everybody, don't talk at once, but would you, down the bottom of your screen, you will see a reactions button. If you click on that, you can actually put your hand up, as you'll see, as I've done. And what we'd like to do is try and capture, see if anybody would like to speak up. So Clara, you've got your hand up there. I'm just going to unmute you for you so you can share with us.
Okay,
Clara,
thank you.
That's okay.
I am Clara Armut from Budapest, ISP Budapest. So we do have also 3 years budget, and it would be very difficult now to project anything for the next years. We are lucky because we update this 3-year budget only in the fall, so it is October, November, and I hope that by that time we will have more information about the virus and the pandemic situation and how is it developing. The main question here, I believe, is if we can assume a business continuity or not for the next years. And if it's only a temporary something to be handled now and maybe in the next 6-12 months, then it's easier to predict for the later years. And if there will be a vaccine for this virus, then it's also easier, but I'm afraid nobody can tell it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. That's really helpful. Does anybody else like to contribute or share their experiences? Okay, as Zigita mentioned, we have been sharing the link for the survey. Ruth, do you want to explain how you're going to use that information?
Well, I mean, all the SIG members have put in a number of questions or sort of questions, and we've answered them, including putting our contact details at the bottom, and then anything that. So it's an open book at the moment. So you can either add your information or just look at ours, and it's just basic. If you want to add questions, we will then potentially complete them. But basically, it was a document open to these participants.
Yeah. So what we'll do is after the session finishes today, we'll share the link again with sort of post registration. It is a great useful tool for sort of going through, comparing how things are working and operating. If you do want to contribute, and I can see a lot of people have already, which is fabulous. And it could be used as a tool for you to sort of share and network between yourselves. So I think that it could be really quite useful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's one of the things that one of the roles, the mission of the SIGs is usually to try and bring to the ECIS or focus for the ECIS the subject matters or the items that they want to see at the conferences and get speakers and such. So that's basically one role, or to sort of help do these sessions. But for me, it's always been, exchange of information or exchange of experiences, even if it's just going, I'm having a bad day. Yeah, well, it's usual. I've been through that one time, 19 years ago, or whatever. It's just trying to avoid us being isolated in the normal world, let alone an unnormal world. And therefore, at least you know that someone else is doing either the same thing or might have had, tested it, giving it a try, failed, and so that's, I think, part of
the experience. So we are actually going to offer up a number of these. We're doing a series of free webinars about different subjects, so we're happy to share that with you. And what we would also like to do is organise to have perhaps a quarterly get together for this particular group for business and finance managers. If you found this useful, then what we'll do is organise a register your interest link that you can put your details in, and then when we're organising the next webinar, we'll make sure that you actually receive an invite to that as well. Because I think as a community it's much more powerful to actually share experiences, and it also helps you feel that that you're not on your own. And as Ruth mentioned, there's a number of experts in the room here that and not everybody will have the answer, but one of you may do. So I always find these sessions really, really inspiring. You've got a huge wealth of experience and knowledge in your roles. And I think quite often you're very isolated in your role in school, so it's good to actually feel that there is actually a community. At our leadership conference, we always try to organise a specific hour or session for the business and finance managers. So as Ruth mentioned, if you have any suggestions of what you would like to focus on, we can get organised speakers, etc., to come in and spend the days with you as well. So we do hope that this has been useful. I know you're very busy people, and also working from home provides its own challenges with noisy people in the background. But just before we wrap up, is there any other questions or anything that you'd like to ask our wonderful panel before they leave us today?
Or a board meeting that has a pressing question.
Oh, okay, board meeting.
No, no, but that's usually why the benchmarking or just exchanging information is useful, because the question always comes up, and so what are the others doing?
Yeah. Carmel saying thank you. Thank you, Piotr. Do you want to go ahead? Sorry.
I would like to just add one more to think about, just maybe all schools also should look at the banking, investment and financial policy, because I mean, right now we are living in different world than 2 months ago in terms of the finances. So I believe that some banks will lose their ratings, and maybe the schools should look at the banking policy, where you keep the money, and maybe you should divide it between more banks, more safer banks, and also look at your investment policy, because the central banks around the globe are helping the economy, but I found some schools just keeping the money in one bank, and the situation has changed. This is something that's definitely from the finance piece. All schools should be looking, and it's almost weekly right now, because one day, I mean, the bank is AAA, the other day the bank is CCC. So definitely something to think about.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I went through the 2008 and the 2010 experience, and I remember opening a bank, account and shifting half of our assets overnight. So yeah, once you've remembered that, and it's true. Yeah, what Piotr says is clearly something that, if it was on your back burner, should be front and foremost.
There's a lovely quote here. Susie Purcell Byers has actually shared, and she's asked me to share one of her quotes from Professor Ron Heifetz. So I hope I've pronounced his name correctly. Leadership involves disappointing people at a rate that they can handle. So, and she's wishing good luck to you all as you lead your schools through this crisis. I think on that note, unless anyone else has got anything that they'd like to add, I'd like to say thank you for the panel for their enthusiasm and contributions over this hour. As I mentioned, we will send over a recording of this session and also details of any other websites, etc., that will be happening in the future. So I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. You do have a community and you have got lots of people you can reach out here. So we hope, if nothing else, you've gained a few more contacts using the Google connections. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye all.
Bye.
Bye.